Okay. See how we're testing on this one right now. Okay, we're online here, it seems. We're online on both sides, so I'm going to check right now. This is Cork Graham calling you from Alaska, and I will be doing my first stream in a while. And let's see what we got going right now. So today we're going to talk about background history and what I've been up to. Great, we can see that on here. And then I will share this over onto my other page. Going live right now. Let's see how many people are starting to connect. Hey, Andrew, how you doing, man? Okay, we'll send that over onto public post over there. See how that runs. Yeah, that's going good. Cool. Okay. Got that running, and let's see this one over here. Okay. We're on YouTube. How's that looking over there? Who else we got in here? Yeah, man, what have you been up to? I'm gonna start doing a podcast a couple times a week now, so I'm gonna start talking about a bunch of stuff in the current events and past history, and get people caught up on all the events that have happened since they got into a lawsuit with Discovery Channel. Let's see. Going over to my channel right now. We're going live. Cool. How's that looking in there? Okay, so that's running live right now too. Cool. Okay, so who else we got in here? Okay. Vegas. Wow, congrats, man. Damn. What's it like over in Vegas right now with, well, the lockdown's opened up, or is it still pretty tight? Okay. Let's see how we broadcast this on here. Share that right now. Link. Changing this over. Okay. And then if you go over here, what do you get? Cool. Okay. And let's see. Hey, Ziggy, what's up? So how many else we got? Starting up to gym's opening, casino's opening, gun range is supposed to open on the 3rd. Yeah, hopefully you're getting a lot of practice, because it's going to be interesting. Hey Murph, how you doing, man? So how do I sound? Can you hear me? Everybody hear me on here? Testing, testing. 1 2 1 2. Let me see if I've got sound on here. Sound coming through. So how do I sound? Can you hear me? Yep, I got echo on that one. So. Yep. Okay. Cool, there we go. Good. Good sound check. All good, all good, all good. Okay, let's get going on this. So I'll get up to about an hour on this, I think, and then I'm going to be doing an interview with my friend, Army Special Forces retired Brian Morris, and we're going to be talking about a variety of things. And I will turn this down right now. Okay, I'll get that out. And don't want an echo in here. Okay. There we go. Cool. Okay. So a bit about my background. I was raised overseas in Vietnam, Singapore, and for those of you who are following along on YouTube, you know that this is my Treasure Quest Snake Island, the real story, and here's the image of back in that day and all the events, telling you about what happened. I'll be talking about a little bit about the lawsuit for what I can, and we got the it actually went on for about 3 years, by the way. So I was in a lawsuit with Discovery Channel for coming out with my book, and hola Nikki, ¿cómo estás? So I came out with a book called Treasure Quest Snake Island, or actually the name of the book is So You Want to Be a Reality TV Star, and that's it right there. That book came out, and it got into an interesting little battle for my First Amendment rights and reporting, which I find very interesting with a media company, by the way, that it would take a media company to come after my First Amendment rights when actually they should be protecting them. I think. But anyway, so I went for 3 years with a lawsuit. It got resolved, and it came down to the fact that I could actually continue releasing the book, which is available at Amazon, and that one is, as a matter of fact, if you want, you can go over to my page over at Amazon.com, and there's a variety of my books there that you can see. And the latest one, of course, is So You Want to Be a Reality TV Star. And then the other one is, which is everything I learned about sex, drugs, fraud, rock and roll, and vipers as team leader of Discovery Channel's Treasure Quest Snake Island. Then you got the original one that actually got me onto tap Cork right on the nose. And so Bamboo Chest was the book that got me on the radar for Discovery, and that was about my experience in prison in Vietnam when I was 18, going after a story about the American MIAs and using the vehicle of a treasure hunting expedition that a man by the name of Richard Knight had been conducting after Captain Kidd's treasure on an island off the west coast of Vietnam. And I spent 11 months in prison, 7 in solitary, interrogated, etc., falsely accused of spying for the CIA. And then came back and went off to Central America. And then in Central America, basically, I got into it in these types of situations, direct combat with the FMLN and with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And yeah, here we go. Yeah, this is me coming back from a mission. Ended up becoming a PMO, which is a paramilitary officer, recruited by the agency, and I worked in a program that was created, called, basically it was a pseudo operations program. And to define what pseudo operations is basically you dress up as the enemy in order to hunt the enemy, and you use the same tactics as the enemy. And it's kind of like the Kit Carson program that the U.S. Marine Corps was running, or the Kit Carson Scouts program that was implemented in Vietnam, where they used former Viet Cong and used them to go after the Viet Cong. And in the same way, we used FMLN that we were able to get to defect to our side, and use them with 50% would be our fighters with their fighter, the former FMLN, and we used their tactics, and that's how you would run the program, was to go in, set it up with the local military to not work in an area that we were working in, so that we wouldn't get shot or killed by our own people. And it's interesting because program, has been used for decades, various countries, various wars. One of the most famous, and actually we received our training, was from the Rhodesian Salo Scouts, who used the same program in Rhodesia against the communists in their country at that time. But anyway, so I came back from that, and this photograph was actually at San Miguel, which was an air base, which is an army base that was actually overrun. And I wrote a piece years ago, actually, when I was writing for Human Events, about that event and what happened at that attack. And this is was about 6 months after that, and we're still flying out of the base. What happened was the FMLN at about 12 o'clock at night in was in July. It was in '86 in July, as I recall, and they had overrun the base, and basically they were shooting chopper pilots in those choppers, in the Hueys, and who were trying to get up into the air to provide cover. But they'd already infiltrated. There were about a dozen of the FMLN had come in wearing, sports clothes, like they were recruits, and then ended up coming over and getting inside. It was a situation. I've got a photograph. I'll put it up next time, that I actually took about 3 weeks after the attack, and you can see where the barracks where the recruits had been in had burned, and a bunch of the guys had burned in there, and also the FMLN were running around inside shooting everybody, and so you had soldiers shooting soldiers also, because they couldn't tell who was who. That's how crazy it was. But anyway, so I went from Central America, came back from that, and that's actually the first time that I got to Alaska. Had a really bad case of PTS that I had to deal with. I'd already learned from my prison experience on how to deal with it, and moved up to Alaska the first time in 91, and ended up very close to where I am here on the Kenai Peninsula, which led to my coming back here as I started studying something. And what I started studying was a course offered by a Dr. Chris Martinson, and hopefully I'll have him on as an interviewee on this podcast. But basically, Chris Martinson came out. What was it? 2007, 2006. He came out with a course on dealing with a potential economic collapse, and at that time, basically the economic collapse he was talking about was based on resources. Now, when was it? So I got here about 7 years ago. So I came back 7 years ago, and I came back 7 years ago because I realized that if we did have an economic collapse, what would happen is that I did not want to be in a city or an urban environment when that happened. And the reason is because I read a book called 5 Acres and Independence. I'll bring that book up next time. But in the book, this was it was released back in '71, and this book, actually 1970, and the book was actually through a grant from the USDA, and it was supposed to help people get prepared with how to run a small farm. And let me tell you, everybody wants to get on as get a bigger farm, but I'm telling you, with 10 acres, that's a lot of work. If you got 10 acres, or you even got 5 acres, you could feed a family of 4. And that was one of the things about this book, Independence, 5 Acres and Independence, was that he talked about how those who had gone through the Great Depression, and I knew well about the Great Depression because my father would constantly talk about the Great Depression. My father even identified as a Depression baby because he was born in 1930. So the first 10 years of his life basically were 12 years of our life, because we really didn't start getting out of it until about 41, 42. Those first 11, 12 years of his life were defined by having been raised in the Great Depression. Now, for those of us who have had so much wealth, in contrast, I don't think very many of us can, comprehend what's occurring. Hey, Gregory, good to see you, man. People can't really appreciate what we're going through and what we're going to be going through as a result of what's happened. And this is the interesting thing. And I'd like to get these questions going on in your mind, and that is that the Great Depression happened as a result of spending and economics and everything that just flipped over, with Wall Street and stocks and crashes and ups and downs and all that kind of stuff. The big difference about that and what we have right now is that during that time, we always had a good, solid workforce, and the workforce was constantly going. So then you jump to what would happen with the Wuhan virus, or I call it the CCP virus, because first of all, and we're going to talk about that further, is it is a freaking weapon. It's a bioweapon. You got to look at how the Chinese work, the CCP. The CCP, in contrast to just about most other nations, definitely in a democratic nation, which China is not, Red China, contrasting that with Taiwan. Taiwan, and it was Hong Kong before, was very democratic, even though it was under British rule. And I remember what Hong Kong was like as a kid. And I remember when I was released in '84, I went to Hong Kong. I stayed in Hong Kong in '84 on my way home to San Francisco. So remembering that type of Hong Kong to what it is now is mind-boggling. And hearing connections about what's happening over there, and good info. I'd highly recommend listening to my friend Michael Yan. Michael Yan, I always post his on my YouTube and Facebook. Always try to push his channel. He's reporting from Chiang Mai, but he got kicked out of Hong Kong when they had the riots. He basically got kicked out, and just after that, that's when the CCP virus hit everybody. But the thing about the CCP and the CCP government and the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, which is the Red Chinese Army. Remember, this is the same army. People are saying, "Oh, we're going to go into a Cold War." I keep on hearing Steve Bannon, over on War Room Pandemic. They're missing a lot of things, which I find very, very interesting. And this is what you're going to find out as I continue to talk and I have more guests on with me on this show, is that there's a very big difference between those who have a theoretical background, those who talk about experiences, i.e., have never been in combat. If you've never been in combat, there's a difference between someone who's a combat veteran in the military and someone who has been in the military. There's someone who's been in the agency and is an analyst, and someone who's a paramilitary officer, or a PMO. Someone who's actually been on the ground, directly interacting with the enemy, being shot at by the enemy, returning fire to the enemy, conducting operations in order to achieve a specific goal. When you come from that point of view and you see what's happening in China and you see how they hit us, it's like the press is talking about things that those of us who have seen what's happening are talking about from a point of view like, no, it's a bioweapon. You know it's a bioweapon because of the way the Red Chinese are working, and that is that nothing happens unless the CCP is involved. The CCP's total objective, it's not about helping the people, it's not about making a better life for the citizen. It's 100% all about keeping control and keeping power. They define, if you ever read the book 1984, George Orwell, they are the definition of Big Brother. They are what is defined in that book. And this is the thing that just totally blew me away. I've got issues with every president that we've had since Reagan. Reagan, I think, is the last American president we've had up until Trump right now. And it's going to be interesting what Trump's going to do, because what they talk about deep state or the swamp, it's a real thing. And Bannon is accurate about that. It's not a deep state. It's in your face. It is what happens when you have a big government that continues to make more and more money, and you create a pyramid it's upside down. So think about that. You've got a pyramid that is spending all this money, and yet it's being supported by the point when it should have been flipped over. And that's why the pyramid on the dollar is a pyramid, and that's what's supposed to be the base, which is the citizens en masse supporting and defining the nation, and those at the top are the employees of the citizen. And what we've got now is we've got people dictating to us who are supposed to be taking our orders. And that's mind-blowing, because it's almost like they haven't read the Constitution. So it's amazing that people haven't read the Constitution or are not defining their lives by the U.S. Constitution. This is what's supposed to separate us as Americans from just about every other nation. When our founding fathers came to this country, and I'll give you a little bit of personal history, family history that I've been finding out as the years have gone. I'm a member of the Sons of the American Revolution. Why? Because David Graham came from County Antrim, Northern Ireland, from Ulster. They came to South Carolina in 1774 on the Pennsylvania, and then they were at the Battle of Kings Mountain. So they were part of that group of snipers who were picking off Tories, and it was commanded by two actual British Army officers. So that's a bit of history in terms of the finding of the America. Before that, I'm related to the Fuller line and Samuel and that line that came over on the Mayflower. So Plymouth Rock, so that's the northern. It's interesting because when I hear Michael Yon talk about, he talks about Jamestown. Jamestown is the southern Plymouth Rock. And it's interesting because that was actually used. And this is what's going to be, as we'll be talking about one of the things that does scare me in this country, and that is potential civil war. And a potential civil war in this country is pretty mind-boggling because of the way that people are not aware of what could happen. And you got people who are like screaming for a civil war in this country. I've been through civil wars. I've personally been active in civil wars. Central America was a civil war. If you want to know what a civil war is like, really like, look at El Salvador right now. Talk to a Salvadoran. Ask him or her, what was it like during the war? You know, what was it like where cousins were killing cousins and brothers were killing brothers? You know, and sisters were killing brothers, and it was just all over the place. And think about what it's like to be in the South, even to this day, if you're from the North or you're from, you know, you're not from the South. There's some people who just still have an animosity and will even refer to you as a Yankee. Think about that. And it's been how long since our own Civil War? Or talk to somebody who's from Vietnam. You know, what was it like to have a war in your country, and it was based on an overtake from your own countrymen, you know, and speaking the same languages and having to deal with all that. So what we'll be talking about in the future, we'll be talking about the current events that are occurring. I'll go back in when people have questions about the show. Sure, I'll talk about the show. There's some things I can't talk about. I mean, that's and I'll tell you when that pops up. But you'd be surprised at what I can't talk about, because that was one of the things about the book. Discovery Channel never refuted anything in my book. So after a 3-year lawsuit in which they tried to silence me, not once did they refute anything that occurred in the book. Think about that. Because if you've read the book, you've got statements and observations about some extremely illegal, and I mean internationally illegal, activities conducted in the name of discovery. So, which I find mind-blowing for a network that prides itself on bringing documentary and truth and recording and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty sad. But it also will explain why we've got people who go running and hoarding toilet paper. Why are they running to hoard toilet paper? Because they don't know reality anymore. If you've got a group of people who watch reality TV shows and define their actions by that. I live in Alaska. Just over the hill that way live the Kilchers. As a matter of fact, if I get in a plane, and by the way, I'm doing a little plug for my buddy CC Pocock. If you want to learn how to do stole, Pocock is your man. Go over and check out bushair.com. I was flying with him. I got my tail wheel endorsement, and I got some phenomenal short takeoff and landing. And as a matter of fact, I'm falling in love with the Cessna 170B. It's a great plane. When I was like focused on a Maul or a Super Cub. And those are great planes too. I'm actually looking at them all still, because just you can carry more. It's lighter, and it's got a pretty fast. It's got a pretty powerful engine and everything without sacrificing the weight. But anyway, yeah, just over the hill. So you got these people who are coming up to Alaska. We've got a population moving up to Alaska right now. Why? Because they've also got an idea about what's coming, and this is what we're going to be talking about. That's why I'm even broadcasting now, because if you've looked at the previous episodes, it's been all about Treasure Quest. Well, I've said enough about Treasure Quest, except for any special questions that I may not have answered. I'm more than happy to answer them if I can, and just put a text up in the chat, and I will respond. So the situation we're in right now. So the CCP virus has come in. It's taken out our workforce. And that's the wild thing. So this was not taken out by the market and bouncing back and forth. And by the way, just the idea, this was reprehensible from every president, from Bush Sr. all the way to Obama. Every one of those guys has always been a New World Order president. I mean, even Bush, when we should have taken credit for what we achieved by beating the Soviet Union, and then immediately, or actually during that time, assisted at Tiananmen Square. What we're dealing with right now is two things, as a result of two things. Not enabling the democratic people, the citizens of China, making a change within their own country during the time of Tiananmen Square back in '89. And then the audacity and stupidity. This is what happens when I talk about people who have big book sense, but they have no freaking common sense. Who would pay a completely 100% defined enemy and pay them and give them money in order to perhaps sway them away from a political infrastructure that has been defined for decades and had murdered millions and millions. I think it's like 45 million people have been killed in China as a result of the CCP. There's an old saying, it's like, don't worry about the enemy taking out your own people. You're more likely to be killed by your own government. And that's the reason that I mean, you see up there, that's a long shooting rifle. That's my easy half-mile rifle right there. That's a 6.5 PRC. It's a Ruger. Ruger flew me out to the FTW ranch. It's kind of like for a little sniper refresher. And, oh yeah. Guess who bought a lot of shares in Norwegian Airline right now? Yeah. That's going to be interesting. We'll talk about the economics. This is the thing about the CCP. I was raised in Asia, okay? I had to study a variety of languages when I was in Singapore. So when we were in the Singapore American School, we had to learn Mandarin, we had to learn Cantonese, we had to learn Tamil, and we had to learn Malay. Those were the classes that we were required to go through. You had to go each semester, you had to go through at least one. And based on which one you liked, you stayed in, you continued on. So we had to go through every one of those. One of the things that was interesting in the Mandarin class, we had to study a book. What was this called? Like it was Black Heart. I'm forgetting the title completely, but basically it was translated into a book that I highly recommend, and that is Thick Face Black Heart. And she actually passed away, the author. But she talks about this book that came out in the 20s, and it's the was it Jing Li? No, that's the Bat Lady. We'll talk about the Bat Lady. We'll talk about Peter Daszak. You should go and check out who Peter Daszak is. We'll even talk about Dr. Fauci. I'm going to be curious about Dr. Fauci, because why does somebody stay in government for such a long time, quote, to retirement? See, I always, from my experiences in D.C., I constantly call D.C. the snake pit. Why do I call it the snake pit? Because every time I go there, I'm reminded about how vile it is. You're being thrown into a snake pit. And see, the Western equivalent of just about everybody in politics in D.C. is they've all read Machiavelli's The Prince. Well, there's a Chinese equivalent that is much, much darker, and that's the one by this author. So Zhongli, yeah. So this one, and it's about the black heart, thick face. So the thick face. This is how China, the CCP runs, but it's all through the culture, and they never give you the truth. They will never give you the truth. If they're in politics, they will never give you the truth, and it's up to you to find out what is past that thick face. So they'll give you a thick face, or a blank face, while they're lying to you, and they're working from what this author had talked about, the black heart, and it's defined and it's taught repeatedly. And if you're in politics in China, you are schooled in this before you even get in, because it's just to prepare you in order to deal with everybody else that you're dealing with in the CCP. Okay. And most people from other countries are not prepared for this, because it is so freaking dark. This is the reason it's understandable that the Bat Lady would be working on something that nobody in their right mind would be working on, which is a virus that's uncontrollable. For instance, our bioweapon experts have stated they would never work with the coronavirus because it's too uncontrollable. But yet, the Bat Lady had no problems working on the thing. And if you'd seen some of the photographs of some of the labs, of the Wuhan lab, how even the seals were totally compromised. That shows you what's been was happening over there. So they're taking our, and this is the thing about it, they're taking our money. So it's like the one report, they stopped doing this. It's interesting that the administration was supposed to be the most transparent administration, the Obama administration, is actually during that administration is when they stopped publishing how much we were paying the Chinese. And the last time it was publicly available, it was $300 million for economic development. Okay, that's just economic development. So we've been paying the Chinese since Tiananmen Square with the idea that if we pay the Chinese, the CCP, the Communist Chinese, got to be very clear on that. It's the Communist Chinese and it's basically the government, because everything comes from the CCP down. It doesn't come in a democratic society. Should be coming from the citizens up, as it's supposed to be coming in our country. But as we're seeing what's been happening, dictation has been coming from the top down. So there's something kind of funky. Yeah. And people don't realize what that really means and how it's been affecting our society and how it's going to affect us in the future. Okay. But anyway, so let's get back to this. So we've been paying at least $300 million to the Chinese for economic development. And that's just one section. Okay. That's through state. And let's see. And when we give the peace prize to the Chinese, the distant and empty chair, then the Chinese salmon boycott, and so on. Yep. They're going to do more of that. What they do is the Chinese will take the money, they'll make the buys, they'll take over the debts, and that's the thing. They're taking over the debts with their own money. That's two forms of two streams of income, two streams of revenue came in. One was the money that we gave them through State Department. The other one in USA, etc. The other one is the money that they've made off of us as their customers. So think about that. We're paying the Chinese for economic development. Money that should be in this country, building up our own infrastructure, strengthening our own infrastructure, and taking that. Here, let's fix this right here. Okay. And we're taking our money, giving it to the Chinese, and having it come back to us as product line that we're then also purchasing. So cheap product is not cheap. So that's one of the situations we've got here, is that we've been putting all this money into China. Their total objective since the creation of the CCP has always been to take over the world. The whole idea is to be in control of the world. And this is the thing about it that is so different in terms of how to describe this. This is what's so different about the country and how they, the Chinese are looking at the rest of the world in contrast to how the rest of the world has been looking. This has been this global. It's in one level it is the same, and yet on another level it's not. Okay, the globalists in this world have been coming with this idea that we'll all get together and we create the UN, and we tried to do that with the League of Nations. That didn't work out too well, and you're going to see what's going to be happening probably within the next 10 years with regards to the UN, because it's what has put us in this problem. Because you'll always have a wolf that gets in with the flock when you have that kind of framework. And that's what's happened. The wolf has been the CCP, and the flock has been everybody thinking, oh, well, we got to get together in kumbaya. And not only that, we'll help you. Because we believe that if you see how good a free economy and a democratic capitalist society is good for you, that what you're going to get is a better situation for you in China. And of course, you're going to think that, the CCP shouldn't be, following along the lines of Mao. They're still Maoists. We dealt with the Maoists in Peru, the Senderos. What were they doing? They were killing everybody. And the worst part about it is, most of the time they were just killing the peasants in the mountains of Peru. Because when they got into it with the Peruvian army, they got whacked. Okay? Or the most famous one was sadly those two backpackers from, I think it was Sweden or Norway. And then they got killed. Was this in the 80s, early 90s? Yeah. This is the way the Maoists work. It's all about, if you don't follow the CCP line, if you don't follow the Maoist line, they kill you. That's the way it works. And the way the CCP has learned to modify that, because they can't take on the whole world. And this is what is just infuriating, is the reason that they've been playing this game with us is because they knew they could never get into it with us militarily. And there are people who are right now saying, oh, well, you know, they now they can. And I'm going to say, you know what? They can't. And I'm going to be talking about further, because we got to get ready for what could and should be happening. Because when you're getting pigeonholed and put into a corner where they're able to beat the hell out of you constantly and just kicking your butt all the time, and the Chinese, the CCP, has been kicking our butt for decades, using our own money to hit our economy, hit the economies around the world. And what they do is then they come in and then they take up the debts. And when you take up the debt of a country, you own that country. So former Rhodesia, some of my instructors, they're looking at Zimbabwe, and now Zimbabwe is basically owned by China. All these countries they've been picking up, and everyone is about resources. So think about this. This is the same thing that happened during the time of the, Imperial Japan. And the metaphor about this is very powerful, because Imperial Japan and the CCP are the same. The difference is, with the Japanese, their emperor was depicted as a god. And so they were the chosen ones, going out into the world and doing what they will. And the same way with the CCP, this goes back to Imperial China. And this is the thing about it. It's a different dynasty. Okay? It's just another dynasty. So it has an imperial attitude. And this is the way the imperial attitude carries through, is that China is depicted as the sun revolves around China. Okay? So that's the reasoning for China and the CCP going around the world and basically taking control. They're doing it in South America. They've done it with various nations. They're doing it right now because they need the resources. They need the meat. They need the food products from around the world. And there's two countries that are the biggest producers of food: the United States and Brazil. And look at what the left in Brazil is trying to do right now, is because if they can get rid of Bolsonaro, they'll succeed. And Bolsonaro needs to be really clear on who the Chinese are and what the Chinese are doing. Because if he doesn't, they're going to eat him up. And the way they do it is that thick face, black heart. I'm telling you, man, it's just like, to really understand it, I'll bring the title. I've kind of, let me see if I can bring it up right now. But I've got, I've been rereading this. I hadn't seen this book in days, years. And I was able to find a copy, and let's see. That's not it. Yeah, this is, let's see if I can pick. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, Thick Black Theory. You can get a copy of it. You can find it online. It's translated by Zhao Anxin and Marilyn Zhang. And it's basically, Yi or Li Zhongwu was the author back in 1920, 1921. And he wrote this book. And basically, it's the Chinese equivalent of Machiavelli's The Prince. And it's a lot darker. And they've been able to use that. Yes, China certainly can't be trusted. They hold the highest amount of debt. Yeah. And that's the thing about it. We shouldn't be paying any of that debt back, because we've given them more than enough money to get started. And then they're going to ask us for more money. Then they lied and used the WHO. I mean, the WHO is unbelievable, because the WHO uh, God, what's his name? The director. He's not even a doctor. You know, this guy is just totally. It's unbelievable that they're constantly saying, first of all, that it's not created in a lab. This is the thing I talk with my friends about, and that is that this is how they can be brought into court if there is ever going to be an international court on this, because you got to actually grab them physically. See, this takes violence. And how many people are willing to have violence against the CCP to actually take the leaders and bring them into an international court? So we did that at the end of World War II when we had the Nuremberg trials. And why were we able to so easily close cases on these people? It's because they documented everything. This is the thing about a socialist and bureaucratic society. It's really well versed in documentation. They document everything. The Nazis documented everything they were doing in the concentration camps. And the wild part about it is the Chinese have been doing the same thing. So they'll say, no, it never could have come out from a Wuhan lab. But then if you go and read all the documentation, all the published information that the Bat Lady and the World, is it Health Alliance? World Health Alliance? No, it's the Eco Health Alliance. We're going to be talking about them. That's Peter Daszak. So how did the NIH, Fauci, how is it they're blowing freaking $5 million and sending it over to Wuhan lab so they can do what? Oh, modify the coronavirus. That's interesting. Yeah. And what? Hey, I haven't been I'm not getting paid by the Wall Street Journal. I'm not getting paid by the Washington Post. I don't work for the State Department's intel. I don't work for military intel. I don't work for the agency anywhere. It's just but I'm able to find all this stuff on the internet. I'll show you next time. We'll talk about all the documentation that's out there. And not the least of which are magazines that you can automatically just pick up, like Nature. It's published in there. And she's even quoted as saying, I hope this did not come from my lab. But then you can actually go to her publishing, her research, and show how she's been working on the genetics of the coronavirus, the original coronavirus, SARS, and how it became the COVID. And you can see that there's no way that thing could have naturally developed on its own. We're talking about thousands of years of development. And yet, suddenly it went from what it was 10 years ago to what it is now without any help. Yeah, that's the crazy thing about this. So we'll be talking about that in the future. And I'll be showing you, just in the same way that I'm able to show you, photographs here on the screen and everything. So I'll show you the actual documentation. And below, I'll type up links so you can go and check out things on your own and read about it. And I think you'll find it very, very interesting. And so that'll be one of the things is, what are we going to be preparing for? And this is one of the things I'm going to be highlighting is the idea that our economy is going to change. A lot of people are paying attention to what's happening. Our economy is going to change. It's not going to just change on a national level. It's going to change on a global level. Okay, we've had this global economy, but even right now, we got oil that's sitting off of Long Beach, and it's sitting off there because they're not going to bring it in and process it because it costs more to actually have it on ground than it is to just keep them in the boats, on the ships, the oil freighters just sitting out there in Long Beach. My friend Vern Atkinson, from Bering Sea Gold, that's thanks, Chris. That's the thing about Bering Sea Gold. His real bit, his main business is he's a pilot. He's a ship's pilot. Okay, and so that's all the freighters coming in. He takes them around the Kenai Peninsula up to Anchorage, etc., etc. That business has been going down, and this summer is going to be interesting in Alaska because a lot of the income that comes into Alaska is tourism based. Well, there are no ships, no what do you call them? The cruise ships. There won't be any cruise ships coming in this summer. So you got a whole base of revenue that was going to be coming in. It's not coming in. We got pilots. You know, I was working on my commercial pilot license. I was all ready to go. I was going to finish off my instrument, and then as probably what's going to happen is I'm just going to do it the way I do, which is I wait until wintertime and I just pop off for a month and I just run through it, you know, like I did with my STOL, my float plane, my ACEL, you know, my aircraft or airplane single engine land and ACES, you know, the single engine C. So I got my float rating, and the key was I was going to be doing some flying up here and doing tours this summer. And there won't be people coming up to do that. So that's just affecting Alaska. Think about it with tourism around the world. How many people are willing to go off and travel? It's one thing to say, okay, the doors are going to open, but how many people are willing to walk in through that door when you still got the death count continuing to come up? And we'll talk about that death count. Because think about it. There have been more people who have died as a result of the coronavirus within this time period than have died in the Vietnam War for Americans. So, yeah, there's some numbers in there. Got to play, you know, find out, because some hospitals, as we've been reading, it's like you got the CCP virus, but you also have like a heart attack, and then they write it down that it was a CCP death. That's an interesting one too. Yeah. So this is what's happening, is we've got all these things occurring. And there's another book that we're going to be heavily talking about, and that is The Fourth Turning. If you do not have a copy of The Fourth Turning, get a copy of The Fourth Turning and read it. Let's see. The Fourth Turning. The Fourth Turning is a book that came out in 1997, and I am hoping that I'll be able to actually have the authors of that. That's The Fourth Turning right there, by William Strauss and Neil Howe. Get a copy of that book. Okay, it will help you. See, because there's nothing, those of us who study history, and if you're a journalist and you don't study history, you shouldn't be a journalist, flat out. I don't care if you're an economics, medical reporter. If you don't know the history of your field, mine's global international, so that's why I pay attention to these kind of books, and when I find out about them, I jump on them. This one's interesting because it talks about an 80-year cycle that occurs within the United States. It's kind of like the seculum that the Romans used to talk about. You know, that Rome would change and shift within 100 years. And it's based on the idea of a generation, you know, of a person's lifespan. So, you know, my dad died in 2012, but he was born in 1930. So that was one generation. So he died at the age of 82. So he went through one of the full 80-year cycles independently on his lifetime. The United States, going all the way back to 1776 and actually going back even earlier to the French and Indian Wars. If you go through there, you start to see similarities. Like the French and Indian Wars have a psychological, societal impact on that society and that time period as it does with the wars that we've been having in the Middle East, like in Afghanistan and Iraq, in terms of how it's affected ours. And we have people coming back, and how is it affecting and not affecting, and you think there'd be like a hoorah, but there's not been a real like, you know, wow, we really won, like World War II. Like World War II was the crisis. That's where we're at now. Okay, and we came into this crisis, what is it being depicted as, 2005, 2004, so it's a 20-year on this cycle. So by the time we hit 2025, supposedly, according to the authors of this book, Strauss and Howe, The Fourth Turning, we're going to be going in, and you see this happening. And it's really interesting because they said that we would be coming into the crisis at about 2004. Now, think about watching what happened in 2004. And when I thought about it, it blew me away. Coronavirus. The first evolution of coronavirus, of SARS coronavirus. That happened in 2004. Is that not wild? So the authors of The Fourth Turning, Strauss and Howe, they're talking about that was going to be the beginning of the next 20-year cycle. Okay, and that's the cycle we're in now, which is the fourth turning is defined as crisis. And then when we get through that crisis, so what was the previous crisis? The previous crisis was 1930, 1929, going into 1945. Okay, and that's going to have some very interesting impact, because if you look at what has happened, so okay, we got the coronavirus, the original SARS coronavirus came in, and then if it came through, that we had to go over, and we didn't get into an immediate depression, but we had all that buying out and printing up of money in 2008, 2007. So we go through that, and we've been on borrowed time, and we've been borrowed on time because of the CDIC, the Social Security, all these things that were in reaction to what happened in 1920, 1930, 1931, 32. And this is the thing that's going to be very interesting, because every depression that we go into is affected and goes into a war. And it's going to be global. And how is it going to be fought? Because we've already expended every other part of war. And those are various forms. There's economic war. There's political. War is a component of politics. It's one of the tools that's being used. Okay? And they're being used in order to modify the structure of the world as we know it. And the Chinese have been really good. That's why they have succeeded globally. I mean, now they're getting into a huff with Australia. And if I was Australian, I'd be freaking paying a lot of attention right now to what's happening, because they're so close. Just in the same way that they had to pay attention to what was happening back in World War II with the Japanese, who were so close and got into New Guinea. So the next step is going to be kinetic. And that's what we define as the type of war where we get into it and we start shooting. And that's what people have to be prepared for. And there's going to be the actual conflict, the actual fighting. Where's that going to be? It's going to be in, say, the South China Sea and the Spratly Islands, where it's going to be a naval battle. It's going to be a naval war initially, and then it flips over into a nuke. Or it goes into a situation where it's like, the fastest thing is to take out Beijing and restructure the CCP by changing the capital of China, the new China, to Shanghai. See, what happened at the end of World War II is we went in and we totally restructured Japan. Okay, and we had to. Because if we didn't restructure Japan and remove the emperor as the political structure of Japan, we'd be back into it again and again and again and again. That's how that works. And that's what we didn't do in the Soviet Union. And we've been dealing with the fallout of basically someone who's former KGB. Okay? And now we're dealing with not only a sworn enemy of the United States and any free country, because they're all about control and staying in power, is the CCP. So pay attention to what's going to be happening, and I'm going to be talking more about the fourth turning and how to think about what's going to be happening in terms of what's happening. Another 55 days in Beijing then. Yeah, pretty much. But worse. It won't be that long, though. That's the thing. Everything that was happening in World War II and the Depression, because of communication or lack of communication, think about what happened then and happened now. So let's say it's the 10 years, the 30s is our Great Depression. Here, that Great Depression could come into where we're coming into, and right now, regards to the Great Depression, 1929 has already happened. That happened about a month ago. And then from there, 2 months ago, and then from there, we go into 1931-32. See, the thing is, 1930, that wasn't that bad. And same thing with Wall Street going up, and oh, wow, we're out of it, they're fine, and then boom, everything just freaking hits rock bottom. Same thing here. But what's happening in a decade, in years, is going to happen within months. Why? Because of the connectivity of our world. Get a haircut. That's one of the things I want to talk about. Here in Alaska, I will be getting a haircut, and I'm going to take dibs. What day will I be cutting? Whoever picks the day that I get a shave and a haircut, because this is my winter hair. This is how I stay warm up here. Okay? I like the Wolfman Jack look because it keeps y'all warm. And also notice when I was doing some wood trimming outside that it's nice when you got branches, you know, if they hit you in the face, they don't like rake your face up. They bounce off the hair, which is kind of cool, off your beard. But as it gets hotter, I will be getting my trim, my summer trim, to get ready for summer, because it does get hot up here. But yeah, back on the what's happening. So things are happening in months. Okay, they're not happening in years the way it did in the previous crisis, the previous fourth turning. So then after the fourth turning, we get into the high. So the last high that we had was 1946 until 1964. Okay, then we had 1964 until 1984. And 64 to 84 was the conscious awakening. And that was when we had all the different types of the 60s. You know, that was like, oh wow, you know, I'm finding myself. And you know, the baby boomers were like, oh wow, you know, it's like life is not as I thought it was. You know, when I was being totally pampered by my parents who were busting their ass from 46 to 64, creating that high, that big boom. So think about that. Everything we've been living off of has been a result of two things. One is going previously to the Spanish-American War, where we got a big boost of resources from Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines. All these brought in resources and wealth to the country. Okay? Then we get into World War I, which was an expenditure and a loss. You know, us getting into world wars is a setup. But in this situation now, it's a response, which is going to be interesting. You know, why are we getting into this world war again? What we're looking at right now is an economic reset. And that's the way I'm looking at it. And that's the thing I suggest people look at, not as an end-all. Because as you notice, there's a bunch of suicides that have occurred. Sadly, that's a response to the CCP virus, but it's also been a response to the idea, oh my God, I can't work right now, and what am I going to do about this? So, one of the things to think about is, if it's a reset, how can I be ready on the other side? And that's what the reset was in 1946. So, everybody came back from World War II who survived, and said, we want to change it. And that's actually where America became a world power, truly became a world power. And that was by design. That's when you had people like the Rockefellers were spending all this money. My mother's from Ecuador. Okay, so to this day, she still thinks fondly of the Rockefellers. Me, after studying the Rockefellers, I can't stand them because of how they're involved in, quote, this New World Order change and how to make a global, they were the epitome, and they were the money behind globalism. Part of it was sending money and aid into Ecuador. So she has fond memories of the Rockefellers and how they brought all this money to Ecuador. You know, when Ecuador was doing really poorly right after World War II and during World War II. And that was the last war before the one in the 90s, which was when Ecuador lost quite a bit of the Amazon. Was when they say world war, there was a world war. And it's interesting that how that was being fought in South America, like, you know, the Nazis with the Argentines and all that was happening, socialism and how socialism was coming in. It's funny how socialism and communism, basically, you know, Lenin even said that socialism is your doorway in to bringing communism. Okay. So here we got the Chinese, and the Chinese are have created the situation. It's already happened. So when people are thinking about the CCP virus, it's a situation of just dealing with your personal safety. You're going to have to make your own decisions, and you're going to hopefully get some accurate information. Because as we noticed, the people who should be giving us the accurate information have not been giving us the accurate information. I.e., do you wear a mask or not wear a mask? You know, and it's kind of bizarre to see somebody driving around in their own vehicle wearing a mask. Because remember, it's to protect you from someone else or protect someone else from you also. Okay? So if you got nobody in the vehicle, why are you wearing the mask? Yeah. But we'll talk about Fauci. Because that's pretty wild, man. It's like, he signed off. From the research I've done, he signed off on all these $5 million that went over to the Wuhan lab. He's also the same guy who said, no, there's no way it could have come from a lab. And he's best buddies with Peter Daszak, and Peter Daszak is best buddies with the Bat Lady. And this is where I have real issues, and that's why I've gotten so fed up. It's just like, you know what, can I bring in some freaking accurate reporting when the Washington Post and NPR can't? Because they don't understand what a conflicted source is, or conflicted, you know, when you have a source who has a conflict of interest. You know, i.e., if your name's Peter Daszak and you run Echo Health Alliance and you got $5 million from the NIH that you funneled in to the Wuhan lab so the Bat Lady could do all her research and splice and do all this crazy stuff. Kind of like, you know, my favorite scene in Jurassic Park, you know, where Michael Crichton's character is saying, it's not the question of can you, but should you? And that's where we are. This is the result of that, okay? Big question is like, how many times has that been done before? They're big questions, you know, and Mikovits, this Dr. Mikovits, maybe I could get her on here. I'm curious, because she's got a lot of controversy going on in her life. Because she's come out with a book talking about how it's all been corrupted in there. And if you look at the at big government and how the when you get big government, you have an institution that becomes a self-licking ice cream cone. So it has to keep itself going. And that's why this is the big difference between government and corporations that have to survive by actually bringing profit, you know, and it's kind of like you produce something, you make money. As compared to government, which is, in order to qualify yourself, you have to expend your full budget. And as a matter of fact, you are reprimanded if you actually save money. That's a really screwed up model, and especially when that becomes the bigger part of the pyramid. So you remember, you want the pyramid upside down, which is the base is the citizens and business, production and making money. And then at the top, you have government protecting that. And that's all it's supposed to do. It's not supposed to make sure that you get money. Because where's that money coming from? That money is going to be really interesting because we don't have a workforce right now. So people aren't being taxed. People aren't being taxed. Where's the money coming from? So is it coming from debt? Is it printing up money? It's the idea that we've been pulled off the gold standard by Nixon. By doing that, it just enabled the government to go in further to debt. When's that debt going to be collected? How is that debt going to be collected? That's one of the big questions to ask yourself is like, where are we now? Why are we here? And I really think if we survive this, what's going to happen is, or how we're going to survive this, is that we're going to get into an agrarian economy again. And that's the reason I've come back to Alaska. Because I thought to myself, where could I live off the land and subsist off the wildlife? And in the lower 48, there are places, you really got to find them. If you have a farm, you're going to be doing a lot better than people who live in the city. Because remember, and I will give you an example of that. It was back 2007. I think that's when we had like a spike in fuel prices under the Bush administration, Bush Jr. And that freaked me out because I was living in San Francisco at the time. And during that time, there was that 2-week period where the shelves at the local supermarket in downtown Nob Hill area, San Francisco, the shelves were going empty. And that was unheard of. And that's when I freaked out because I said, if you can't get the food, and this is just on it's not even like 25 cents. It was I got to go back in there and look at what that was, but it was such a minuscule rise in price that caused truckers to say, well, no, I'm losing money if I work based on the price of fuel. Okay, so think about that. Something as minuscule as that was enough to freak out truckers that they wouldn't work, they wouldn't drive, and as a result of that, shelves were not being stocked. Okay, so that's in an urban environment. We're not even going to talk. We'll talk about further about how you control a society by pushing them in urban environments, because that's part of COIN. When you do counterinsurgency, that's one of the things that you do is you get the people out of the rural areas and you get them into urban areas, because then you can control their water, you can control their sewage, you control their food, and control their power. Okay. Then you controlled the citizens. Okay. Same situation here. You live in the urban environment, unless you've got a really solid food garden going up on top of your apartment or in your house. And you can, I mean, if you do it right, you still have to deal with the idea, where's your water coming from? What happens if the water goes down? This is one of the biggest worries when I first heard about what was happening with the virus and how it was affecting people. The first thing that hit me is like, what about the people who are running the generators? You know, who is making sure that power is going to continue to come? Who's making sure that the water will continue to come to everybody in their units? Okay, in their houses, in an urban and a rural environment, in an urban and suburban environment. Here, I'm rural. My water comes straight out of the ground from a well. Sewage goes straight out into a tank. Okay, and then it bleeds. This is totally independent, except for power. But even if power does go out here, just go back for lighting, you know, and I haven't gotten solar in yet. That's one of the things I'm working on, but that's one of the things to be thinking about. But in regard to food and water, so those are the things: food, water, and shelter. If you've got those, you are independent. If you don't have those and have no question about those, then you might want to have a question about it and create that question. How are you going to answer that question? So I'm going to close off, and I'll be talking to you soon. As a matter of fact, if I can get Brian on shortly, we'll be doing another one. So come on back, and hopefully we can answer some questions for you then.